Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Great Exhibition Roads Festival, new online series of events where we bring you the best of the arts and science of South Kensington straight to your home. My name's Laura McMahon. I'm the Community Learning Officer for the Royal Parks in London. And today we've got a great discussion ahead of us. We'll be talking to Hugh Smith, who's the Wildlife Officer for the Royal Parks. Hugh's going to talk to us about what he does for his job, the importance of biodiversity, and the future of green spaces. He'll also be telling us some funny stories of his time working in the parks, like missing pelicans and even having lunch with a duke. Before I introduce Hugh, I'd like to remind you that today is an interactive discussion and we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments. So you can write to us in the YouTube chat function, but please be considerate when posting in the chat. We will be removing anything that disrupts other people's experience. But now I'm going to transfer or introduce you to Hugh. So welcome, Hugh.
Hi Laura, hello everyone. Thanks for joining us this morning.
How are you,
Or this
Hugh?
afternoon now. Yeah, no,
This
I'm
afternoon.
I'm well, thank you. Yeah.
Amazing. So, Hugh, I'm going to start off asking you, obviously, I think the most obvious question. So, your role is the wildlife officer for the Royal Parks. It's not your normal day job. How do you describe what you do as a living for your friends and family?
Well, yeah, it can be difficult sometimes to describe it because the role is quite varied. But ultimately, I'm sort of an urban park ranger, if you like, or a or urban reserve warden. So like there are many reserve wardens that work outside of the city in sort of more rural settings. I work in an urban setting, so it just has a few subtle differences, but essentially that's what I am.
Yeah, and I mean that's amazing because yeah, you work with wildlife, but in the center of London, which is very strange juxtaposition. Um, and I guess I really people want to know how you got into the job. So a lot of people ask questions about what qualifications you need to get into your job. And I have this lovely question from Sophie who says, I have a daughter who is only 9 but loves animals and everything to do with them. She wants to be a zookeeper at the moment or a vet, and she asked me to write on her behalf. She thinks your job sounds amazing and she wants to know how you got into your job and what skills you need to be good at your job.
Oh, well, it's lovely to hear such a young person, with that level of drive and knowing what they want to do when they're older. But I would say if you want to work with animals or you want to work in a job that involves interacting with the natural environment, then definitely get involved with those things at school from an early age when you can. Obviously, at the moment it can be a bit tricky because we're all working remotely and some of the school is remote as well. So every opportunity that you can to get outside and go and visit some of these green open spaces, I definitely recommend doing that. And hopefully later on in the year and in the years to come, go and visit as many sort of big open landscapes that you can and varied different types of landscapes. So you'll build up your knowledge about ecology and all things kind of living and the natural world. But that's what I'd recommend doing initially. And obviously later on in your life, you can start to sort of specialize into different subjects and areas that you really find interesting. But that's a really good sign that such a young person wants to get into this line of work at such a young age. So really lovely to hear.
Yeah. And as well, Hugh, so not only have we got lovely Izzy who asked that question, but we also had people who were really wanting to get into this as a career and were asking what kind of qualifications you have or how did you get into the job you're in now, I guess.
Yeah, so it's. I mean, I'm not that old, so I don't have decades and decades of experience, but I essentially went down quite a usual study route of school and A levels and studied a degree. I'm actually a biologist really by training, but really it was the things I did outside of school and education as I was just describing really for Izzy. And it's visiting places and getting to know what the natural world is sort of really about, and you start to form interests, and ultimately networking in that environment becomes better the more interested you become. And I definitely recommend getting involved with as much volunteering work as you can, whether it's volunteering your local park, local small local green spaces, or whether it's going and staying for a long period of time somewhere and volunteering. When I was studying for my undergraduate degree, I went and volunteered for a whole year actually on a nature reserve in in Wales, southwest Wales. I lived alone for a year, and although that sounds quite extreme probably to some people, actually the experience was really good. And despite having very little money at the time, it was actually really valuable. And not that everyone's got the time to go, volunteering for that sort of length, but definitely, if you have any spare time, then I definitely would get out to your local green spaces and inquire about volunteering and working with people with the type of knowledge that you would you'd like to aspire to have in the future.
Yeah, that's fantastic. And obviously, with lockdown restrictions at the moment, obviously we're telling people to stay local and volunteering opportunities might not be available, but hopefully in the not too distant future that will be available for people again. Fantastic. Thanks, you. Okay, so right, so obviously the title of this is A Day in the Life of. So I think we have to ask you, what is a typical day for the wildlife officer?
So a typical day, I start relatively early, but not crazy early. Usually around 8 o'clock in the morning. In the summer, I might come in a bit earlier because it's light and I can actually see things. If I come in earlier than 8 at the moment, I'm walking around a dark park, so not too much not too much happening there. But I'll come in. Obviously, I always need to notify people that I'm in because I do a lot of lone working. So I need to let people know that I am around, so that if I suddenly disappear, people know where I am. And usually my first job of the day is going and feeding the historic waterfowl collection that we look after here in St James's Park. And so there's probably 50 or 60 birds that we have as part of that collection, and that's including our magnificent great white pelicans, which I'm sure all of you are familiar with. And so yeah, that's the first job.
Amazing. Actually, we've got a question from Paul which says, what's the rarest species that you have in your bird collection, and what's been the most challenging species to look after?
Oh, that's a nice question, Paul. So honestly, actually, in the collection, we don't have anything that's ridiculously rare. We certainly don't have any red-listed species in the bird collection, but a lot of them are exotic. So looking at them from the perspective of someone that's used to seeing native species on a lake, yes, they do look outlandish and seem quite rare. But in terms of rare native species on the lake, we have got smew, which are a small diving duck, which are amber listed in this country. So they're part of the collection, but you wouldn't see them, or you'd be very unlikely to see them in the wild, really. We also have goldeneye in the collection as well, which are another beautiful native diving duck. And again, you probably wouldn't see them in this neck of the woods these days. They were once a lot more common, but we have a few pairs of those on the lake as well. And we also have a number of other relatively unusual birds, such as whistling ducks, which people probably may have walked past and seen before. They're very noisy, little brown sort of tiger striped things. And of course, we have great white pelicans, which probably are the most outlandish looking birds you can think of, really. So yeah, some unusual birds, but nothing super rare. But in terms of being a challenge to look after, the pelicans outweigh all of the others because they eat a huge quantity of fish and have quite a specific diet. So they do take some looking after.
Amazing. I think we have actually a picture of the pelicans. Holly, could we put up slide 2 of our pelicans? I'll hopefully get that up. Amazing.
Oh,
so, I mean, Hugh, we can't talk about your role and not talk about the pelicans. Can you tell us a bit about the history of our pelicans, why we have them, how many we have, and what they're like to look after?
So there's a lot of history that comes along with these big, some might say not beautiful birds, but actually they are very pretty up close and very unique. But they've been in the park for getting on for 400 years. Not these exact birds, but there's always been pelicans in the park since the sort of late 1600s, and they were a gift actually to Charles II initially. But since then, there's been all kinds of places that have donated them to the park. So actually, at one stage, the Russian ambassadors donated them to us because they were once quite a widespread species out in Russia, great white pelicans. But in the last few decades, we've actually had them donated to us by Prague Zoo, who we're really proud to be sort of partnered with, and all of the birds in the picture are from Prague Zoo, except one who who actually turned up at a garden in Southend about 25 years ago, and she was
Oh, we
brought
need
to
to
us.
talk
And
about this. This is Gargi, isn't it?
yeah, this is Gargi. Yeah, so some of you may have heard of our fully flighted pelican called Gargi. She can fly. She can do as she pleases. We like to claim that she isn't ours because actually she could leave whenever she wants to, and occasionally she does. She does take flight and disappear off down the Thames and goes on adventures that we're not privy to. But yeah, she's a magnificent bird, and when she's flying and when she's soaring, it's sort of yeah, it's quite a magnificent thing to watch. So so you have to keep an eye out for that. If any of you are visiting the park at any point, look to the sky. There's always a chance you might see a 10-foot wingspanned pelican.
Yeah, it's pretty impressive. And wasn't it back in the springtime, I think, we had a bit of an escape attempt from Gargi?
We did. I think it was just an early spring holiday she was going on. So she went.
Everyone else was in lockdown. Gargi's like, now I'm
Yeah,
going to go traveling.
it was Easter, and she just wanted to get out of the park, I think. And she flew down to Staines-on-Thames, of all places, and actually roosted for a couple of nights on some islands down there. And we knew within the space of an afternoon that she was there. And I was asked, "Are you going to go down and collect her? Are you going to catch her?" And obviously, she can fly, so actually catching her is impossible. But luckily, she's got an incredible capacity for a call, and so she soon worked out that if she wanted lunch, she'd have to come back. And a couple of days later, she flew back in for mealtime and to see her friends. So it's it's never difficult to get her to come back. So so we've been lucky like that so far.
I think it shows that they have a good quality of life in the park. The fact that Gargi can return whenever she wants. We've got a
Yeah.
few questions, Hugh. So I want to ask a few. Oh, someone's asked, what is your favorite animal that you've seen in your park? And someone else with a similar question is, what's your favorite encounter of wildlife that you've had as part of your job?
Oh well, I mean they're really challenging questions because obviously there are many lovely things that do turn up. But in terms of favourite animal or bird that has turned up, probably for me the most exciting was a red-throated diver, which is a member of the loon family. So they essentially look like a small cormorant almost, and that landed up in Regent's Park. And I had to take some fish that actually were the meal for the pelicans up there to feed it, to give it enough food to make sure that it could move on with its migration. And going up and being involved with that was really exciting. And seeing such a rare bird in central London, yeah, it's really really unusual. I think we had a second question as well, didn't we? But
yeah, I think pretty similar, which I guess could be one that's maybe part of the collection. Eleanor asked, "What is your favorite animal that you've seen in the park?"
Oh, so yeah, favorite animal. I suppose that can, yeah. Well, to be honest, one of the most entertaining birds or animals that did crop up once was a huge macaw that was actually someone's pet, and it decided to go and fly and land on one of the islands in the Serpentine. So so I met the lady whose bird it was, and we actually rowed her over onto the island because the bird wouldn't come to anyone else. It wouldn't come down and land on anyone else, and so she went over, sat on the island. We waited a good half an hour, and after a while, it heard her voice and came and landed on her shoulder. We had to row back across to the mainland with this huge macaw on her shoulder. So that was a moment that was
quite
funny.
What is a macaw, Hugh?
So,
Sorry.
a macaw is essentially a giant parrot, really. So you really they tend to live in places like the rainforest in Brazil. But this was a huge hyacinth macaw. So probably one of the most beautiful birds in the world. But so definitely not a native species to the park, but certainly a beautiful bird and an exciting thing to be involved with.
That must have been a great experience for that woman, just getting rowed across the lake, trying to find her bird. That's brilliant.
Oh, I think she was less stressed than I was at the time, to be honest. So yeah, no, she had a great time.
That's a pretty amazing pet to have. We have another question from Ilana saying, are there any animals that you may reintroduce into the parks?
That's an interesting one. So I think probably within the scope of what we're doing at the moment in the Royal Parks, it's unlikely that we'll be introducing any new species. But who knows? In 50, 100 years' time, a lot of these kind of wilding, if you like, initiatives are becoming more popular. So it might be that elsewhere in London, species do get reintroduced and they make their way into the park. So it may not be us directly that reintroduce them, but it might be that in 100 years' time or 50 years' time, let's be more positive. 50 years, I'll be around then. But actually, we might see some of those things. And I think birds such as goshawks might be on that list because they're an amazing predator, and it's something we're lacking quite a lot. Is larger predators. Throughout most of Britain, actually, but they seem to do really well in urban areas, goshawks. So keep your eyes peeled for those. But I think it'll be quite a few years yet.
Amazing. So going back to your typical day in work, so after you've been feeding the pelicans, what else might you be doing on your normal day in the office? Your not so normal day in the office, I should say.
Well, yeah, I mean that is the thing, isn't it? All of us are subject to having to sit at a desk for periods of time, and a lot of the job it actually is focused on customer service, if you like. So visitors that are coming in, they've got queries and questions, and they're really frequent. As I can see from the question feed already, there's a lot of questions now. If you can imagine, the customer base is quite big here in central London, so we get a tremendous number of visitor questions come in, and they get directed to me. So and it's my duty to make sure they get answered correctly, but also sort of in a timely fashion. So yeah, I make sure that people are fully aware about the sort of the aspects that they're interested in. But so yeah, a good deal of my time is dedicated to that. And obviously there's animal feed orders that I have to make for the pelicans and their fish, and also the collection birds also get through quite a big quantity of bird feed, so I have to make sure all of those are sort of up to date and that there is enough sort of in stock for them. So there's quite a few mundane basic jobs that I have to do as well.
But on the non-mundane side of things, you do have to deal with a lot of emergency call-outs a lot of the times, don't you? Can you talk about any of the strangest examples of them?
Yeah, there are some of those. So I get call-outs probably easily once a day. The warmer the weather, the more people there are in the park, so there's more chance that someone is going to contact me. But the general kind of call-outs tend to be for injured wildlife or for waterfowl that have ended up on a road somewhere, and I've got to go and collect them and pick them up. But you do get some very strange things. So this is a couple of years ago now, but had a phone call from the nearby French embassy, and they'd had a Canada goose come and land in their garden. And I don't know if many of you realise, but a Canada goose needs quite a big flight sort of takeoff path, if you like. So the garden's quite a confined space, and it couldn't fly out over the hedge. So I had to go in there and collect it. But it was strange going through all of the security measures to get into the embassy, and then and obviously this beautifully pristine sort of building with a lovely marble floor, really well kept. I'm traipsing through there in my muddy work boots, and then coming back out with a goose that's pooing all over the floor. So yeah. That was a funny experience, and also just a unique one there. So
that's amazing. I think I remember you telling me a story recently enough about an Egyptian goose that got its foot caught in a statue somewhere.
Yeah, so we've got a number of big sort of monument-like statues in the park, and some of them are quite intricate in their design. And this particular Egyptian goose had decided to get its leg stuck essentially at the very highest point on this statue. It was about 8 or 9 meters up in the air. It was actually caught between the fingers of a hand on this statue. Something, there's a bit of symbolism in there somewhere, and so I had to get a very long pole essentially and sort of pole it out of this this statue, because at the time there was no kind of cherry pickers or anything like that handy, and I wasn't prepared to wait for someone to come out to do that. So we managed to free it, and actually it flew off just fine. But yeah, there's a number of very strange calls that I have to attend, and I'm sure some more will crop up in the chat.
Yeah, definitely. Fantastic. All right, let's move on to another question. So, obviously, there's so many bits of job, and I think a few people have asked this already. But what is your favorite part of your job?
Favorite part of my job? Well, there are lots of aspects that I really do enjoy, but probably number one is maintaining and improving the natural landscapes of the park, and I've been given some really nice responsibilities to get closely involved with that, with a lot of support from our other teams, like our landscape team and our ecology team, because obviously the landscapes, despite looking like they're locked in history, sometimes they are actually still growing, evolving landscapes, much like anywhere else. So it is our duty as custodians to make sure that they're maintained, but also that we can that they're maintained, but also that we do it in a way that they might improve in the future. So I've been involved with a number of natural landscape projects, which that's probably my sort of favorite part of my job.
We have a great photo, actually. I think, Holly, if you can pop up slide 3, can you tell us a bit about where this is, what's happening, what have you been doing?
So to the untrained eye, that might actually look like a bit of a wasteland, but actually what's happening there is we're sort of re-landscaping a pond on an island, actually. So it's a pond inside a pond, which is is a bit of a strange concept, but ideally it's meant to be being turned into a sort of an amphibian pool and a good environment for aquatic invertebrates. So hopefully by re-landscaping it and clearing around the edges a little bit more, we can allow a bit more light into that area, and ultimately, which will hopefully improve the water quality in there, because the water quality was not the best in that particular little scrape. But hopefully, within the next couple of years, that will become quite a thriving small freshwater pond. And obviously as well, it's a nice refuge in there for invertebrates, because out on the main lake, it's absolutely jam-packed full of predators and fish. So it does mean that obviously it's a hard life if you're an aquatic invertebrate on the Serpentine, whereas these small kind of hidden away spaces are really good for invertebrate communities. So a lot of what we do is trying to promote and improve the invertebrate community in the parks, and our team called Mission Invertebrate are behind a lot of the work and funding for that. So yeah, very, very lucky to be partnered and work with them.
Amazing. Thanks, Hugh. Okay, we've got actually someone's gone back to really wants to ask about the flighted pelican, so Gargi, and they asked, where did she come from? Is it unusual for them to be solo like that, or are they normally part of a flock? So I know that it's definitely a good story about that with Gargi.
So there's every chance that Gargi was a wild bird, every chance, but she could have come from a collection somewhere in Europe, but we like to think that she probably was a wild bird, because there were several other sightings around that time in 1996. Due to a large storm, actually, we believe that they flew off course. So it could well have been that she was part of a reasonable sized migrating flock out in Eastern Europe, and actually she was buffeted by a storm and pushed across sort of the English Channel. But so she's been here for 20 plus years now. But it's we'd like to think she was wild, actually, which is why her behaviour is so unique.
Guess unique for our pelicans, but maybe not for normal wild pelicans. Yeah, definitely. So someone asked, I guess this is more of a what to do if. I think I'll know the answer to this one, but Fiona asks, who should we call if we come across an injured bird? Thinking particularly of Hyde Park, the Serpentine, where I swim. Very lucky you, Fiona. Is there a facility for rehabilitation in London at the moment?
So in terms of rehabilitation centres, we're not a rehabilitation centre, but we're happy to receive calls from people about injured wildlife, and we can obviously take it to the place that it needs to get to. Unfortunately, in central London, it is very difficult to rehome mammals. Always very difficult. So bear that in mind, and sometimes it might involve a drive out to somewhere to take them to a sanctuary. But bird rehoming is a little easier, and there are some really good refuges. That actually the Swan Sanctuary being one of them down at Shepperton. That's a really good place to take them. At the moment, I would actually recommend anyone though that finds an injured bird to just be really careful, because there is actually an avian influenza outbreak at the moment. So be really mindful about handling birds or getting too close to them. Because if they're sick and injured, there is a chance that they are carrying that virus. So be really mindful about that. But in terms of rehabilitation, it's always worth giving us a call, and we'll see what we can do and see where we can take it. And we've got a lot of connections and a lot of people that are happy to help us rehome things. So we can get them to those places. So yeah, do call in.
Brilliant.
And you'll find a number on our website. So
yeah, and I think we can pop up our link to our website as well if people want to go on there. Great. Actually, on that, Hugh, I know that with the when you mentioned about avian flu, we recently had a bit of an encounter with the pelicans, didn't we? Having to catch them all. Can you talk about that? It was I remember you telling me this. It was a bit like a Benny Hill skit.
Oh no, yeah, it really was. So because of these restrictions that have come in due to avian influenza being about at the moment in the country, we took the decision to safeguard our pelicans and make sure they'd be protected should an infected bird fly onto the lake. That is, minimal risk really with that happening, but still, there are kind of heritage birds that we really want to protect, and they're really, really wonderful animals. So we had to charge around the lake essentially and catch them all. But Gargi, the one that can fly that I've mentioned already, wasn't having any of it at all, and she took off straight away and disappeared somewhere else down the other end of the lake. And we're still in the process of thinking that we will catch her if the opportunity arises. But I think Gargi is just going to have to take her chances out there in the wild, because she's very cunning and very very quick. But the others, we actually managed to round them up with a series of canoes. We never needed to actually physically handle them. We actually managed just to corral them into their pen, which is a really big purpose-built enclosure. Should this ever happen, and it's actually where the 3 new pelicans that we've introduced onto the lake in the last couple of years, it's actually where they were quarantined initially when they came in. So I think they're quite confident being in there. So it's never nice caging anything up for any period of time, but in this case I think it was appropriate, and because they're so high profile, everyone knows about the pelicans in St James's. We needed to make every effort to safeguard them. So but there was certainly some comedy involved with catching them.
I can only imagine. I really wish it had been recorded. I'd love to see that. Fantastic. All right, let's move on to another question. So, oh, you've already asked that. So, is there anything that people are surprised to hear when you talk about your job?
Yes, I think there are a number of things. The one that always springs to mind, just because it is the usual punter's question, is, do you know the Queen? Do you know the royal family? How much interaction do you have with the royals? And my answer to that is actually very little. Despite them being an enormous stakeholder here, we do see very little of the royal family. We occasionally get some nice messages from them saying that we've done a nice job maintaining the parks and keeping them looking like as nice as they do, particularly through the recent pandemic. I think we had a nice letter from Prince Charles actually not that long ago. But yeah, in terms of actually meeting and seeing the royals, that's pretty thin on the ground. I do occasionally get invited to Buckingham Palace to go and help out in their garden there, and again, it is if something usually it's if something needs catching or picking up or rehoming, and a couple of times I've been in there to help out with a few bits and bobs. So that's always a nice experience. But yeah, so I'm not chums with the royals, but they are around, and they're an important stakeholder here.
I mean, you do say that, Hugh, but you did tell me a story recently about having lunch with a duke. So can you tell us a bit about that?
Well, he's not technically royal, but again, a relatively high-profile stakeholder, living in a world that's entirely different to mine. So that was a nice experience. But a couple of years ago, the Duke of Wellington wanted some advice, habitat management advice actually, and invited myself and the Kensington Gardens park manager to afternoon tea. I sort of thought it was all a joke actually, until we got there and were sat down in front of the Duke of Wellington with a cup of tea in our hands and discussing these things, and that really was a good chat. And it's always refreshing to meet people in high profile stations who are actually really down to earth and really normal characters. So yeah, really, really lovely.
Amazing. Thanks, Hugh. We've got loads of questions here about kind of our habitat management and stuff. So I've got a question from John. So, hi Hugh, what are the plans for keeping water clean? Reason I ask is I know there's a really great group who clean town waters called Biomatrix. So can you talk about like kind of the work we do to improve the quality of water?
Hi John. Yeah, good question. So actually, in terms of sort of macro lumps of rubbish that end up in our water bodies, you've probably noticed that we've got an amazing cleansing team who work for us, and they do regular picks. So actually, in terms of like plastic bags and things like that, it's pretty minimal getting into the water. Yet you'll always find the odd thing, the odd old boot here and there, but yeah, those things are cleared out on a regular basis, and we take a boat out to make sure we pick up those things. But in terms of kind of the more on a micro level, and making sure that nutrient loading isn't too excessive in our water bodies, we've got careful kind of management procedures in place for those. And a lot of the time, it is actually a case of adding cool water in the summer from our artesian wells into the water bodies, because actually a lot of the water bodies are still connected. So the Round Pond and up in Kensington and the Serpentine are connected. So it's a case of making sure that enough cool water is moving through those water bodies so that we don't get big buildups of bacteria and we don't get big buildups of algae generally in the summer. Algae is fine in small quantities, but when it starts to smother a water body, or particularly the kind of filamentous algae that grows on the surface of water bodies, we do kind of want to keep that to a minimum. So yeah, we have also previously put various different compounds into the lakes throughout recent history, to make sure that those nutrient levels stay low. But it is one of the big challenges of managing these spaces is water quality and making sure that we keep on top of it. And the Environment Agency are quite keen to come out and sample quite frequently, particularly because we have swimmers using the Serpentine. As someone actually mentioned earlier, they were a swimmer,
Yeah,
I
I
think.
think Fiona said
So,
she's one of our swimmers. Hi, Fiona.
but as Fiona can testify, she probably hasn't been ill too often, and the water quality in the Serpentine is pretty good. I've swum in it a number of times, and yeah, it's an amazing experience to swim in a lake in central London. Anyway.
I think this predates both of us, but wasn't I know that sometimes we have to drain the lake in St James's. Isn't that right?
Yeah,
Didn't that
so
happen a
that
few
is
years ago?
it happened back in about 2006, I think 2005, 2006. But that was the last time that it was drained and cleared out. I think the difference with St James's Park is that some of you may not know, but it's actually concrete bottomed or concrete lined, which is kind of a relic from the Victorian era. So it was essentially because I think at the time the decision to clay line it wasn't thought very practical, so they concrete lined it. But the only issue with that is obviously that it does heat up more quickly. So often we do see filamentous algae very early on in the year on St James's Lake, and that can be a bit of a challenge. But yeah, generally it's a manageable thing.
Yeah, I'd love that. I think we have some photos up on our website of what the lake looked like when it was drained. It looks like a big swimming pool that's been drained. It was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah, there's a series of historical photographs, and I think actually it was drained every year at one point. Not extensively, so not the entire lake. They would actually bund it in places, so there were still places for the waterfowl to sort of exist during the draining. But then they'd clear out the sediment in various other places. But actually, since those days, we've got a massively improved pump system in the lake, so it just keeps it so much more aerated, and the water quality and clarity is really good. Again, people probably see the odd superficial floating bit of rubbish or plastic in the water, but actually, it's not breaking down there and then that moment, and that isn't kind of making the lake toxic, and we really try to remove those as quick as possible. But generally, the water quality is really good. It's packed full of fish, and it's full of we've got full of dragonflies in the summer. So it really is, yeah. It's obviously been a work in progress for many years, but it seems to have really good water quality.
Amazing. Thanks, Hugh. Great. Okay, so I'm gonna go on to another topic. What do you think about the change of roles are for parks and other urban green spaces in our cities, and what do you think's brought this about? I'd kind of like to know. So yeah, what's changed with the roles of, say, the royal parks over the last 150 years?
Yeah, so I think the parks themselves superficially look probably quite similar to someone that saw them 50, 60 years ago, but actually a lot of the management and the way that we interact outside of the park have changed hugely. So I think, consequently the roles have changed in the royal parks, and I know, speaking from experience, that this role is very different to the same role 50 years ago. I think we've actually got some nice YouTube links to some footage of my predecessors, actually, who were both in the role for one was in the role for over 50 years, from 1900 through to the early 1950s. The next was in the role from the 1950s until the late 1970s, and then my immediate predecessor was in the role for another 50 years. So actually, in 120 years, there's only been 4 of me.
So it's obviously a very good job if
so
people are staying in there
well,
for life.
it could be a job for life. Could well be. And
Do you think
I
you'll
think
be here for another 50 years?
Oh, I'm not sure I'll live that long, but yeah, that'd be lovely, wouldn't it?
That wouldn't be too bad. And what about obviously with the pandemic and our well-being with nature, do you think that there's been a change in perception on the importance of green spaces in city centres?
There has. I think it's been a green revolution in a way, without trying to sound cheesy, in the last year. And I think people visiting their local green spaces is just absolutely it's completely changed. The numbers are just astounding, really, in the parks, and more probably from the perspective of local residents, or reasonably local residents. Actually, I think there were people that previously just weren't really utilising their local green spaces, and this goes beyond just the royal parks. I'm talking about nationwide, even probably internationally. People are using these green spaces so much more, and I'm not saying they were undervalued previously, but I do think that a lot of people have changed their minds about what they think about their local green space. So it's still changing now, and I think it will continue for the next couple of years well, certainly and beyond. The value that people are placing on these spaces. They have been certainly they've been a lifeline through the last 12 months, and hopefully they'll continue to be through whatever disasters and problems that we have. The royal parks will be here, hopefully. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think actually talking about that green revolution and people really appreciate the green spaces, so many questions have come in about people asking about wildlife, about habitat management. So I'm just going to pick out a few. I think Tim's one's actually really kind of brings together this idea. So hi Hugh, are the parks for wildlife first and people second, or people first and wildlife second?
Oh, you're speaking to the wrong person. No, I think there has to be a balance, doesn't there? Ultimately, these are heritage landscapes, so we've got a duty to preserve them. No one wants these places to become museums and too dusty and too kind of set in their ways. But we have a duty to maintain a landscape. So it's about finding that balance, really. And anywhere that we can find that we can improve the wildness of, or improve the habitat for nature, or improve the setting for nature, then we're really striving to do that. So there has to answer your question, that there has to be a balance, really, because if we rewilded everywhere in all of the royal parks, it would probably be quite awkward for people to visit and walk through, and we have tremendous visitor numbers. So you have to think about all those implications. But it certainly is a balance, and it's very much 50-50. And we need to be thinking about the robustness of these spaces, particularly with climate change and things like that, which are upon us already. So yeah, we need to be thinking long term about making these landscapes really resilient, and keeping them very natural. So yeah, I think that's about as well as I can answer that, really.
I think you answered it perfectly. So many people have been asking about rewilding. I've got a question from Sabrina, who sent this in beforehand, saying, have the royal parks been making more spaces wild to encourage native flora and especially fauna?
That is really really something that we're trying to encourage and do. I think I'm guilty of it as well, but the phrase rewilding, or the term rewilding, gets used an awful lot, and I think wilding in a sense is probably the term that's more suited to this setting, because obviously rewilding, really we're talking about landscape scale stuff, which the parks are definitely part of, a landscape and a green corridor across London. But we need to remember they are actually physically quite small spaces. So we need to remember that we're working with sort of small spaces. But yes, we've tried to improve the wildness of several locations over the last decade, I would say, and maybe just beyond. An example of a really good spot in Hyde Park to go to if you want to see an area that is much wilder than it previously was is the meadow up on North Carriage Drive. So if you want me to describe where that is, that's kind of the north side of Hyde Park, almost the northwest side. and I recommend going and sitting there in the summer and listening to the grasshoppers, and you're moments away from busy Oxford Street, but you're surrounded by invertebrates, and I've seen kestrels hunting up there, which means there must be plenty of small mammals running around. So yeah, that's one sort of success story there. But we're also doing that on a smaller scale in St James's Park. The lake edge is an area we really focus on here. We've increased wildflower plantings.
Oh, speaking of, actually, I think we have a picture, Hugh, of the meadows in St James's. Can we
Oh,
get pictures?
there might be a nice picture.
Slide 5 up, actually, if possible. Oh,
Oh
I
yes,
love
yeah.
this. I love these pictures. So can you tell me what's happening? Why have we got these 2 pictures up?
So that there is the St James's lake edge, and we're looking from the palace end of the park down towards, as you can see, the London Eye sort of tucks in the background there. And yeah, that's kind of a mixed wildflower. I almost said display there, because it's so flamboyant and vibrant at that time of the year. But to sort of put into perspective how important wilding, just small areas, can be, the photograph on the right, might be on your left, but on the right is is of an owlet, or a fledgling, well, soon to fledge tawny owl, and this was early last year, so early 2020, and so they nest quite early in the city because it's a little bit milder and warmer, and my colleague there is holding this owlet that had fallen out of a tree, which wasn't actually a bad thing really. It was actually just experimenting and learning how to fly, but it happened to have landed on his tractor bonnet in one of the leaf yards, and we think it was sat there because the bonnet was warm, and so it was just sat on it, happy as anything. But my colleague just clambered up onto the machine and picked it up and put it back up into a nearby bush, and that bird actually went on to fledge. So we saw that bird actually hunting, or learning to hunt, with the parent bird later in the year. So was certainly a few weeks later. But that there's an example of how, if you manage a space correctly, you end up with essentially a full food chain. So you've got the invertebrates, the small mammals, and then the bigger predators. So that's a really nice success story there. But wilding spaces absolutely is going to be key to the future of maintaining them and ensuring that they're resilient to climate change.
Amazing. And I think we've probably just got time for kind of one last question. So I think on that, Hugh, you talked about rewilding or increasing biodiversity in our parks. Can you paint a picture of what you hope a person walking through our parks in maybe 50 years' time might see and hear?
Well, we've got some long-term management plans which do span towards the 50-year mark and beyond. And I think possibly one of the most significant changes that we'd like to see, or certainly that I'd like to see, would be kind of a softening of edges in the park. So we've got an awful lot of concrete hard standing areas. Usually those are adjacent to water bodies. Some of that is structural, so it's to make sure that they don't corrode and fall apart. But actually, a lot of it is really just because it's a convenient thing for people to walk on. So, and the Victorians really like that. They love their promenades and their kind of walking down straight corridors and avenues. But in the future, I'd personally love to see those edges softened, so that we get more of a marginal kind of area on the edge of these water bodies, just because the water bodies are so significant in the parks, and they're so well loved. But actually, so much more could be done for the species that love to inhabit those spaces. So I mean already in the parks we get unusual species such as water rail. We get reed warblers. We occasionally get reed bunting. I believe we even had a bearded tit once show up quite a few years back on the Serpentine, using those reedbed spaces, which are they're marginal habitats, if you like. So
Can we actually, Hugh? Oh, we've got a picture, I think, of St James's Lake. If we could get slide 7 up.
We do, yeah.
Yeah, so this is a really great example of what you're talking about, isn't it?
So yeah, I think this is a particular section of St James's Park where that has been successful, and those marginal habitats have reached almost they've almost reached their kind of climax community there, and it's really yeah, it's perfect for those species that want to use those spaces, but in a way that still allows us to appreciate nice views without without it blocking things in, but also but it certainly adds to the visitor experience. I challenge anyone to say that that a space that looks like that could be improved by adding more hard standing, or by making it more manicured. I think is a term that people seem to use quite a lot. I think that is a more interesting place to visit. It's a more exciting place to visit, and everything from the bird song through to seeing huge huge swarms of aquatic insects above the lake in the summer. That really indicates that that is a that's a good piece of habitat, and it allows people to sort of escape when they go to these places. So yeah, keeping things a little bit wild is never a bad thing, and we're certainly not going to change our path in the Royal Parks anytime soon. We're certainly going to keep walking down that one.
Amazing. Hugh, thank you so much. Unfortunately, that brings us to the end of our lunchtime discussion. I'd love to say thank you to Hugh for that fantastic talk. If you'd like to find out more about us in the Royal Parks, including our fantastic online experiences and events that we've got going on for both families and adults, you can check out our website, royalparks.org.uk. For those watching on YouTube, apologies if we were unable to get through to your questions. We had so many questions come through. Thank you so much for that. A recording of this discussion will be available soon on the Great Exhibition Road Festival YouTube channel, where you can watch it again and share it with people. All our future live events and recorded videos will be appearing up there, so you can go and follow them there. We will have a link being sent out to you soon on YouTube with an evaluation form. We'd love to hear your feedback from this session. But otherwise, that is it from us at the Royal Parks. Thank you for everyone for tuning in, and
Thanks,
hope you
everyone.
have a great afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Bye bye.